like to introduce our speaker for this evening. Dr. Rumi Kato Price is professor of psychiatry in the Washington University School of Medicine with research expertise in trauma spectrum syndrome, including trauma experiences, post-traumatic stress disorder, substance abuse, and suicidal. She has over 25 years of experience conducting research with the continuous federal research funding as the principal investigator. Dr. Price has held leadership positions over the last several years and most recently founded the Human Trafficking Collaborative Network with 3 co-founders. In the last few years, Dr. Price has focused on epidemiological work for traumatized populations, including victims and survivors of human trafficking, and a systematic prevalence estimation and case definition of trafficking in persons in South Africa, and currently continuing to expand to a large-scale randomized control study on trafficking survivors sponsored by the Department of State. She obtained her PhD from the University of California at Berkeley. Please join me by welcoming Dr. Price.
Good evening and welcome to St. Louis. I am at Washington University School of Medicine and I meant to stay in St. Louis only 1 year. My gosh, I've been here for 30 years. It's a beautiful city, you get used to it. And thank you for the organizers of this conference. It's been 2.5 years since we went into a cave. And this is my first in-person talk of this size, so forgive me if I kind of stumble over words. And I also like to acknowledge survivors and humanity recognized today, right now. Please stand up. I can't see. Human trafficking survivors attendees here. Are there anybody here? Would you like to state your name? Your name?
Oh, Christian.
Christian. Nice to meet you. Maybe I'll come down and then learn a few things from you afterwards. Thank you. Thank you for your courage. Damn, can you turn that light a little bit? Maybe I'll come down here. Well, then you can't see me. Sorry, it's just light is so light that I can't see anybody down here. But thank you for your courage and resiliency and the leadership that you're teaching us how to understand you. So thank you very much. So today, I'll be talking about something that you probably don't hear much. We talk about the global human trafficking, or we call it the trafficking in persons. Okay, first I'd like to acknowledge also for the sponsors. And for several years, Institute of Public Health at Washington University, as well as the School of Medicine, have supported us. When we started in 2015, there is nothing in the School of Medicine to discuss something called human trafficking. And I did not know, after 20-some odd years of studying trauma, stress, PTSD, what the human trafficking was. And so we have come a long way. We also, I can't see. Okay, maybe I'll come down if you don't mind. Yeah, so I can see, my eyes are getting worse and worse over years, getting old. So we have a beautiful coalition called the Missouri Coalition Against Human Trafficking and Exploitation, MOCATE. They have helped us considerably. I'm coming from an academia, and they're a community-oriented coalition. Also, Dr. Andrea Nichols and Catherine Pravos Andre Nicole was a co-founder of the Human Trafficking Collaborative Network, and I learned a lot from them. So we're a company supported by the United States Agency for International Development. They do interesting things. They don't just send out the supplies. And if you read carefully, they also work in Ukraine, for example. Right. And also we are supported by United States Department of State, and the one that we are in is called the Program to End Modern Slavery. And this is the group which facilitates scientific research and the diplomacy a little bit in human trafficking globally. Okay, so I just wanted to put a little ad for ourselves. So our Human Trafficking Collaborative Network, as I mentioned, we created it in 2015 when students asked about human trafficking, and they said they wanted to have a house somewhere in the university. And our mission is really to provide evidence-based information to the larger community, St. Louis and beyond, so that misinformation, disinformation is not going to spread like fire. And I was talking at the dinner table about this episode. When I started, somebody said that St. Louis is the 12th worst human trafficking city. And I said, where did you get the 12? So, well, we heard from somebody, so on and so. So I spent 2 days digging up where it came from. And I finally found it was in this FBI conference comment. And what they did was they listed the cities in alphabetical order. So the St. Louis came as a 12th city in that alphabetical order. That's where the 12 came from. It's like, no, we're not going to be doing this, but we have come a long way. So you're probably full, had a wonderful dinner, right? And you probably wanted to go back to your room rather than listening to me. So I created some quiz, and we'll go through some of it just as an entertainment, after dinner coffee perhaps. So, according to the most recent global estimate of so-called modern slavery, I don't like that word because it doesn't quite make a good distinction between historical slavery of black people and modern slavery. As you know, the slavery that we used to know was state-sanctioned. Modern slavery, as we call it, is not. But in any case, and that's my disclaimer, but the world uses modern slavery, so I use that word too. But anyways, going back to the question, according to 2021 global estimate of so-called modern slavery, which region of the world is estimated to have the largest number of estimated 27 million people trapped in the situation of forced slavery? The answer, raise your hand. Africa. Americas. All right. Asia and Pacific. And why is that? Why is it's Asian and Pacific? Oh, okay. The simple answer is that they have the most people on the globe. So just proportionately, it's a large number. Second one, you may remember it if you're in the field for some time. At least 8 immigrants were found dead inside, of a tractor trailer at the Walmart parking lot in San Antonio on July 27. They were the victims of A, human trafficking, raise your hand. Human smuggling? Or both? Okay, so it's split, and you're so good. They were the victim, according to the news report, they are victims of human trafficking. But human trafficking sent in a complaint. No, actually they were smuggled, being smuggled. However, it's possible that some of them were also trafficked at the same time. So this is kind of the question where you could have it both ways. All right, but news report was incorrect in calling them being human trafficked. Okay, let's go to the next one. So according to Tennessee study of homeless and runaway youth accessing Covenant Health Services carried out between 2014 and 2016, what percentage of those interviewed in St. Louis reported having experienced sex trafficking? 5%? 15%? 30%? Okay, it's a 15%. All right, so you think you're the best person, you have the most knowledge. Sometimes we even get wrong, and I would have gotten wrong. I had to look it up. This is Laura Murphy's work. Okay, so this is in St. Louis. Arnold, Missouri man, was sentenced in December 2018 for production and possession of child pornography. He produced child pornography videos of an infant over an approximately 5 months period and possessed other images of child pornography. What was he was indicted and sentenced. So what was his prison sentence? 1 year? 10 years? 120 years? So the one in the back, what did it say is 120 years?
Hopefully they stacked his years for all the different charges.
Oh, that's a good reasoning. I actually don't know the reasoning. But my guess is that because it's an infant and they stacked it up, that's probably true. I remember it because I collected press release. I remember this in 120 years of child pornography, but they wanted to set an example. So this was actually 120 years. Yeah. So it really varies by state. It varies by particular state attorney. I mean, the United States attorney. So this is an excessive is the wrong word, but then this is a very long one. Okay, so I think I'm done with. Okay, this is an interesting one, and you need to be a little bit tech savvy. And using the RSS feed and the Google Sheet. You know Google Sheet, right? Nightlight in Missouri. They do wonderful work. A nonprofit in Springfield collected unique images, back page, they don't exist anymore, but back page ads before it was dismantled. It was dismantled a couple years ago, I think. Yeah, right. But it was before that. So how many unique ads did they identify posted that are linked to St. Louis City over the 9 months from 2017 to 2018? That's a 2-year period. So the thing is, these are not unique individuals, so they identify through the phone number linkage, and that's how they identify. So the number there is not unique individuals, but the phone numbers that are linked with the web page. So, A, 1,000, B, 10,000. All right, so some of you, C is 30,000. But there's a click effect somewhere. So, why did you say 30,000?
Because they have so many pictures and they have so many links that it could be the same news, they could be sometimes up around, so they it's just unstoppable and that
Right. Yeah, I think your reason is good. St. Louis, in particular, for this one was very high. In Missouri, Kansas City, and St. Louis are the two biggest cities that harbors trafficking. But this one, it came out very, very high. All right, so you're still awake, that's good. So the rest of the time, rest of my talk, and I hope I don't go in forever, but so I want to talk a little bit about the definitional problems. That's problem globally, but also in the United States, and it has a specific ramifications. And I use public health approach because I'm in a psychiatry, and I also work in the public health area. So I would say what it is. And then I show you just a little bit of new global and regional finding. And what we do is to provide evidence-based information, as I mentioned. And now we're working on global trafficking in persons. So I say just a little bit about that. And fragmented data of St. Louis in the state of Missouri, we have enough of it to give you a little sense of what's really going on in the state of Missouri. And lastly, I want to touch on the issue of what can you do? What can we do? What can I do as a researcher? What can you do as an advocate? Okay. So federal definition, and this is almost verbatim, and you as an expert of human trafficking don't need to read that, right? So it's separated into sex trafficking and labor trafficking. That's how in the United States, human trafficking advocates understand how trafficking is categorized in general. And in case of minors for sex trafficking, you don't have to have force-flowed coercion. So why is that problem? So I want to go back to the tip-based origin. In 2000, most of you know, it was created to be coinciding with the International Trafficking Protocol. They call it the Palmel Protocol. And the U.S. Trafficking Protocol was intentionally vague because they understood that each country has its own specifics. So they do not want to over-specify and make it a non-applicable to other cities. So in the United States, from 2000 to it evolved its own way. And the problem we have is it's categorical, and it separates into sex and labor trafficking. And we're way behind in understanding the labor trafficking in the United States. And also, we don't have the gradation. Some people are exploited, but not quite meeting the federal definition of human trafficking. But does that mean that the person didn't suffer? May have suffered more than somebody who has been doing, but it was their business. Also, pimps. Pimps are not sanctioned unless they use violence, basically. So pimping is a legitimate business in the United States unless they pimp minors. So that's a big problem. So so we started using public health approach, and I don't need to go into the details of this, but basic tenet of it is that there's an individual, there's family, community, so on and so forth. And we use the ecological system as a way to understand and a way to deal with human trafficking. So there are two things that are distinctive in the public health approach. One is the understanding that human trafficking is just the tip of the iceberg. You all know that. But we're trying to quantify it. That's probably the difference. So one on the left is my diagram, where we see the victims of identified human trafficking cases. That's what we see in the newspaper. That's what you hear about it. So one on the right is a report of 2015. And well, yeah, I put that in there to say St. Louis in Missouri is one of highlighted states, but it could be a lot of things, overzealous FBI agents or the attorney's office. But what I wanted to share to you is if you look at the fine print numbers, it's very small. So even the highest one, Missouri, Texas, and a couple of the states, Florida, it's over 40 or something like that. And this is annual record. And do you believe in the entire state of Missouri or Texas, there are only 50 people? No, right? So that's the point. So basically those numbers that FBI or just ICE collect is basically the tiny portion of the tip of the iceberg. So people have been collecting data on the second tier from the service providers, so on and so forth. Then what we see, there's a vast, the bottom of this. Boundaries there or something. Can you hear me okay if I scream? No?
Two.
Thank you. I'm going to do this. So when did I lose you? Okay, so I got to the middle. So the bottom is the huge, the largest proportion. We don't know who they are and how big that is. The other reason that we use this approach is that health consequences very close. Health consequences is very well known by this time. From very fragmented data, it's really tragic. So from a law enforcement perspective, they don't care about that. Public health, medicine, social work, they do care about the survivors and their well-being. And once you have some of these problems, it's lifelong up to a premature mortality. So that's a reason why I switched to this field after years of studying veterans and military personnel. Okay, so let's move to global landscape. How many of you actually pay attention to what happens in the world? I mean, not just the Ukraine or Russia. Okay, so most of you know. Good. I'm only going to show you just a few slides to give you the sense how different it is when you compare global landscape and local landscape. Okay, so the modern slavery, which includes in the global literature forced labor and forced marriage. Now, forced labor, so you say, what is sex trafficking, right? Now, international classification includes sex trafficking and exploitation under forced labor, which makes sense. And that was the first question I had when I look at the TIPA definition. Why isn't sex trafficking separate from labor trafficking? What's so big deal about that? Of course, it's a big, but it doesn't mean that people who are exploited without the sex didn't suffer. So internationally, they use labor trafficking as an umbrella term to include both commercial sex exploitation and trafficking, other than the kids, as well as labor exploitation and trafficking. So So the modern slavery, I don't like this, modern slavery somewhat correlate with the income level of countries, not one-to-one dose response. So if you look at the number which is on the left, that's the number of the 2 million income all the way down to 6.6 million. So lower middle income has the most impact because developing countries, most of them are now lower middle incomes, not lower income countries. And in the right is a ratio or the proportion. It's not a percentage, they put percentage and have 10 over, it's per thousand number of people. So if you put it that way, it's very clear that income level of a country is very well correlated. They have. That's because most of the trafficking occurs in a condition of poverty, economic disaster, and you add all the other things. Then that kind of triggers the situation. So that is also true for most health outcomes. You look at the HIV, not COVID. COVID, US screwed up badly, but most other diseases, it correlates very well with income level of the country. And also political system. Okay, next one. Next one is, this is for one of your quiz. So we're looking at the forced labor and what country has the most percentage of a forced labor. That includes labor and sex trafficking. And most of you got it right.
Yes. Yeah. I could tap dance.
So what was it? So you get it right. The largest number comes from Asia and the Pacific, in part because that's where the people are. India. I was talking to somebody about the migration, how significant risk factor migration is. So this one is from the same data on the left anyway. So total is the 4.1%, and if you are immigrants, it's about 3 times as high. And that's true for males and female. And I added the map of Ukraine on the right. So I am a first immigrant. So when I think of immigrants, I don't think of people who were forced to migrate. I think of somebody like myself. I love the United States. I came to the United States and I stay here, right? But the large proportion, globally, migrants are forced migrants. Sometimes they're voluntarily migrating, but for the reason that they don't have a control, like violence, poverty, so on and so forth. And some people use displacement. I don't think that's quite correct for most situations. Ukraine, definitely so. Now, the USAID is paying close attention and started pouring the money to Ukraine for human trafficking identification and the prevention, in part because it's a huge number in such a short time. The displaced Ukrainians are flooding outside of Ukraine. And it's a somewhat unique situation because in part it happens in such a short time.
Brought to you by Duracell.
So this is an emergency, when we're talking about, Asia and Europe, many people think that, they know human trafficking happens in Thailand and in a lot of Asian countries. So they put trafficking there and don't think that it happens in the United States. So that's what we thought for a number of years, that kind of takes a lot of responsibility. They have, so the larger numbers is because of larger numbers.
Yeah, well, I said that. That's because I love this better. Because if you look at proportionally, meaning that if you take the denominator and then how many people are there, it's not Asia and the Pacific. It's Arab countries, or of course Russia. But anyway, I can't put this one in, so I'm just going to hold on to it. The Ukraine, that's pretty unique. Can you hear me okay now? Yeah, okay, that's better. So Ukraine is pretty unique because men stayed in Ukraine, and it's only women and the children, and sometimes the elderlies who have to flee. And that creates a prime incentives for traffickers in the European countries and other countries. So it's been fluctuated. This one is from April. We're giving the talk, and I don't know what the number is like. Some of them went back, but then because of the escalations, they're again fleeing. It's really tragic. But the State Department also is paying close attention to what they have to do for the victims and exploited people because of the war. All right, so I just have 2 slides on evidence-based trafficking in person research. In the international scene, we don't use human trafficking, but use the word trafficking in person. So I use interchangeably. This is a scene of the mountain, Table Mountain, and it looks flat in South Africa. It's a beautiful place. I haven't been there yet because of the COVID, but this is also a place where the informal settlements are developed, in part because it's very natural and then people don't live there, so the wealthy people don't bother them. We have done some field work there. So you see a very beautiful houses, and behind that is town, sandy town, or what they call it, just living at the edge of the properties, and like a storage space. So it's a strange mix of wealth, beauty, and poverty and exploitation. So right now we started embarking on the new research with new gang of 4. Myself, that pictures were 2-3 years older, 2 or 3 years earlier, so maybe I look a little younger than I look now. Sheldon Zhang, who is a methodologist and have been in the trafficking methodology field for a long time. Margaret Walper from South Africa, and Erika Kogler, my dear collaborator at AMSL. So what we're trying to do is, based on the previous study finding, by the way, on that, we found 17% of high-risk sample met the good enough criteria for trafficking in persons. So what's the number you saw previously? 0.2%? That's not the case. And are we picking up like cases or those who don't meet criteria? No. because ILO, International Labor Organization, has specified certain criteria, and our instrument picked those numbers from the ILO criteria. So they shouldn't meet the trafficking criteria. So that's huge, even though this is high-risk sample. So I think what the people are getting is incorrect. Another data from Vietnam, 18%, Sierra Leone, 30%. Those actually meet a standardized criteria of a trafficking in person. Most of them are labor trafficking though, or the forced labor. Okay. Oops. Okay, so what makes evidence-based research? We're using a standardized assessment, we're using the kind of sampling and talking to people in a very systematic way. And also, in this one, we will introduce a randomized control trial, just like a trial for drug development, which is the way we should do to prove whatever we did actually had an impact. Otherwise, a placebo effect or some other effect. However, when you apply that RCT to vulnerable trafficking population, I sometimes wonder if this is the way we should be doing the research. So that's my confession from today. Okay, so last segment of it. Do I still have time? I guess you're still working. So I'm just going to give you some information about human trafficking in Missouri, just because you're here in St. Louis. I feel like, okay, you guys have to know something about the Missouri. Most of you know, this is from a Polaris hotline-based human trafficking case. And can you see okay? So I circled red, that's Illinois, our neighbor, and Missouri. So people look at this, hey, look, Missouri is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 16th highest number of trafficking reported. The trafficking reported is 16th highest. What's wrong with that? Right. Another reason? Huh? Yeah, right. So, Missouri is not that highly dense population. So if you cut with the denominator, we are on average. So, people can quote this and say, oh, we have a lot of human trafficking. No, it's not that we don't have them, but it's not like we're top tier trafficking states. So this is another complaint I have. So in the United States, we see most cases, this is a state of Missouri, but other states are pretty much similar. We see a lot more cases of sex trafficking than labor trafficking. Now globally, from the previous slide, you know the world 2/3 are labor trafficking. So does that mean that we don't have them? No, we have them. We're not seeing them. We're not identifying them. I think that's it is. I don't have the evidence for that either because I don't know the true number. For this one, we also did our own, and this is our GIS data from the press release provided by the Department of Justice over 1 year period. This is a little bit old. So what it shows is similar pattern of concentration in certain areas of those cases that are indicted, arrested, indicted, and sentenced or pre-bargained. So Kansas City and St. Louis is the biggest, but you see a Joplin, Springfield, a little bit. This is 1 year, so total of 117 or something like that. Most cases, can you guess what kind of cases show up in those FBI report. Pornography. So we did it 1 month, and then 90% was a pornography charge because you leave the paper trail. There's not paper trail, image trail. So child pornography are most frequently identified cases of human trafficking in the state of Missouri and Illinois. And I think that's probably true for other states as well. Another thing was, so if you look at this indicted, arrested, sentenced cases that mirror the paralysis map. So what we're seeing is whether you're taking the top tip of iceberg or the mid layer, this is what that is, we're probably seeing the same trend, just the number is very, very different. Okay, so this, I'll probably lose a license as an epidemiologist. So Texas did a back of the envelope type of prevalence estimate. If you're from Texas, pardon me. And there are a lot of problems, but they did it. You know, our state of Missouri doesn't even have the will to do that. So they came up with 79,000 sex trafficking victims at any point of that particular year, 17 or 16, and 234,000 labor trafficking. Okay, so you just take the population difference and apply that to Missouri, then we should have about 68,000. What are people finding in the state of Missouri? You know, you saw about 40 cases by FBI, and I'll show you the provider survey came up at 400. So again, you know, we're not Texas, so we probably don't have as many Mexican immigrants. That's probably true. But nonetheless, the bottom line is we are off, we're really under-identified the true magnitude of trafficking victims. We also did what we call the risk marker mapping. And what this does is we can't count them, but we can at least map out risk factors, the things that would make people at higher risk of trafficking. We can map that out because there are a number of indicators. So in this one, what we found was if you know the geography of St. Louis region, so St. Louis is obviously at higher risk with respect to vulnerability, not in terms of numbers, which we don't know. And we see two patterns. One's called urban trafficking risk markers. The other is rural, like Warren County. Rural, poor household, which also shows, according to the indicators we gathered, at high risk for trafficking. And this is from my colleague, Erica Kogler. She didn't collect them, but she got treasure trove of data from International Institute. And what she found was, if you take the International Institute TIPS report, then labor trafficking is reported higher than the sex trafficking, which makes perfect sense, right? And that, let's see, surprisingly, the country of origin is from Mexico, and some U.S.-born people. We don't know enough about the labor trafficking of the U.S. citizens, and this one captures some of that fact. Let's see, let's skip that one. So Kate, Dr. Nichols, and Pueblo collected the data using the providers' information. So what they did was they asked providers statewide, according to your record for the say 1 year, how many trafficking victims did you serve? So from the 107 service providers, they identified 442 survivors. Again, if my estimate, back of the envelope estimate from Texas is true, this is awfully underestimated. Basically we're not seeing a ton of people who had a very similar experience as those who are identified by FBI. Another thing is we see a racial disparity here, so that according to the racial breakdown of race and ethnicity in Missouri, which you see a lot more whites, but the African Americans are overrepresented in the trafficking victims as seen by service providers. Okay, so probably want to go home and go to your room and take a nap or something. So I kept saying, it's underrepresented, underestimate. There is no one prevalence rate that you can quote. You just can't. So stop that exercise. But Bureau's data shows that, as I kept saying, prevalence rate is much higher than what's been reported by the government and the law enforcement. For sure, and even by service providers, they were underestimated. And I mentioned that forced labor without commercial sex or sex trafficking is more prevalent globally than the sex trafficking per se. And migration is a major trigger in the case. So racial disparity, I mentioned, this is something you should pay attention to. How many African Americans in this room? In my group of HCCN, we have none. We just don't, for some reason. And then we did have one African American female. She moved, and she said, this group is mine. So we do need to pay attention to the fact that we don't put enough effort to recruit the racial minority, or maybe sexual minority as well. Okay, so the last slide, I think. So what can you do? So as a researcher, I would like you to check the information, whatever the number you see, do check and do fact check as you do in the political statement by politicians. And sometimes old data, you find the nice data, but that was created 15 years ago. That kind of data is sometimes more harmful than it's beneficial. I do use old data if that's the only data I have, but I always try to get the most recent data. And from a research perspective, this field is moving very, very fast. So the number is going to change, funding is going to change, and try to get the newest data as possible. If you're going to be giving a lecture or you're doing educational activities. And if I could have a wish, pay attention to what's happening globally, not just locally, and get out of American exceptionalism. And this is not the only place things are happening. And if you go outside the US, you see even more misery, higher trafficking than we see in the United States. And also one plea for you or advocate, United States does not have a national data on human trafficking, and we've been lobbying, but the researchers don't have a power apparently. So Administration of Children and Family, they've been talking about that for 5 years. They haven't done that. And the State Department, they have tons of money, but they don't spend it in the United States. Neither is the USAID. So do something about that. I'm presenting all sorts of data. outside the United States. In the fragment data in Missouri, we don't have a solid data of the United States. The other is I'm learning more and more that whatever the prevention program you have, it has to be locally fitted. So one size just does not fit all. So that makes me feel humble. As myself being trained as a methodologist, it's a one size fit all approach. It just doesn't fit to this population and the most marginalized population, I think. All right, so that's all, and thanks for not falling asleep. I appreciate your attention. Yes, if you have answers, I can no, if you have questions, I can answer. Sure, yeah. Later. Yeah, go ahead. Have a good call.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I appreciated that last slide in terms of things we can do, and you mentioned local prevention efforts, but you're also using like Polaris's national hotline. And so I just had a question for you regarding like national hotlines versus local hotlines.
So we had, I'm not sure if I can answer, we had issue with the hotline. So the AG's office, Missouri AG's office created its own hotline without knowing what to do with the calls, and that confuses the field. People, you saw that in the announcement, right? That's the national hotline. And it's sometimes useful to have a local hotline if that, so that the problem with the local hotline is sometimes it's not manned 24/7. Sometimes only a few agencies have it, so they don't know what to do. I am not all that enthusiastic about quote-unquote large-scale effort of hotline by a state level or city level, which does not get connected to the national level hotline. For one reason is that if local hotline is used, then the number gets lost sometimes. And the secondly, linkage has to be coordinated and well established for two hotlines to work well. And that's also a problem of local service providers network. And the service is notoriously bad. I shouldn't say this, I lived here too long, but it just, we have 130 municipalities, and everything else is kind of fragmented. So one agency has a hotline, doesn't get communicated to another agency. It's awful. I mean, it's getting better. I don't know if I answer your question. Any other questions? Yes.
Thanks also for your presentation. I know you talked a bit about direct service providers and sort of the number that they serve versus those that potentially are not identified within Missouri, for example. Do you think, in addition to sort of the lack of identification, a lot of the problem has to do with lack of capacity of service providers, and then also the absence of service providers in many of the places where trafficking is prevalent? For my purposes, of course, Catholic Charities are kind of the organizations that I work with the most. And of course, many Catholic charities are involved in trafficking-related work, but also many of them don't have capacity for that or funding. So how much of a role do you think that plays in addition to the lack of identification?
So of course, organization like yours can always up effort to outreach, but there is certainly a limit to that, especially if you don't see them. Now, my dear survivor friends, I have several, but 3 of them never got the treatment, never were caught, identified, even though they also use healthcare services, and they recovered somehow, and thrived. And they're a friend of mine, but so that tells me there's a lot more people who never self-disclose their past. And certainly, I don't disclose everything that I did in the past to you or anything. So that's understandable. But I think, to ask the service providers to identify this, bomb unknown, that's asking too much. That's what I was mentioning. It has to be governmental, the federal effort to identify. And I was talking to my past example I know, not in the human trafficking, but the mental health. It was the 1980s, late 1980s, government mandated, it's a congressional mandate, they spent a lot of money and they did a national survey of psychiatric disorders in the United States. Since that time, it was massive effort, at that time. But we know how to count, and we know the prevalence rate of someone 200 psychiatric disorders. Why can't we do that for human trafficking and say like we will in the government? Yeah. So the short answer to you is we need to lobby the federal government. Spit out their money, please. This is not going to be a lot of money to do that national survey. There is a national survey, what's called Ad Health, which does ask some trafficking-related one, like have you ever traded sex with money? So that is a trafficking. And sometimes it's something like that. National-wise at 2.7%. Don't call me because I'm just talking out of my head. It's a pretty large number of our listeners, who does those things occasionally. So national survey can help a little bit, or the National Crime Survey also has some proxy data. But what we need is really using a standardized criteria and a standardized question, and the government does the large-scale study. And I tell you, in South Africa, if we said to the service provider, we are doing the study of human trafficking. For example, shelters, homeless shelters, we have nothing to do with it. Well, we don't have human trafficking victims. Now, if we said, have your client had a situation like they didn't get paid at all? If you ask those questions, they say, yeah, sure. So it's a matter of a perception and also a stigma attached to human trafficking, even in a place like South Africa, of course here, that's part of it, I think. And I learned from psychiatric research, if you ask questions directly to your patient or the community participant, they will say yes. Sometimes they will say, but they'll say yes. And I have asked a stranger, okay, have you had this and you had that? And I say, sure. That's how we estimate PTSD, prevalence rate of PTSD, for example. Why can't we do that for human trafficking? So the tools are there, methodologies are there, money isn't at the government level. So please, if you can, lobby to the federal government. We need to have a national survey of human trafficking. It's still underestimate, but I think we get very good results. So that's my long answer to your question. Any other questions? Yes? No? No, your camera person. Any other questions? Okay.
Some balance.
No, it's not yet. Go ahead.
We're all working in this human trafficking, okay? And we're always trying to help the victim. I think the one approach is we need to do lobbying also the Department of Justice to get higher penalty for those who are trafficking, not more focused on the victim. In that way, if we can lessen that part, then our victim will be less and less. Kind of like that whole thing. If there is no demand for it, and if they don't profit from it, and they don't even, the government is not even looking at the amount of money that had been that not paying taxes because of this business of human trafficking. But I think one approach some group has to start doing on the top, the one from the top, the one who is victimizing, rather than really focusing on the victim. We can always help the victim all the time. And I remember there was a thing in the Bible about the Good Samaritan. There was a story of the Good Samaritan, and then later on the Good Samaritan guy said, "Why don't you stop? Why don't you work on those two people who are victimizing?
Yes.
Help." But
Yeah.
then there's a bigger group, and that's why human trafficking is always. I always follow more of the data from the UN because of my job with this whole issue. They have a lot of information from different countries. Because when they declare that day of human trafficking day, and focus on that whole thing and what we can do. But again, to really help to have more improvement, we need to lobby this state, especially the Department of Justice, to make penalty for those who are victimizing.
So the DOJ, microphone. It's not working? I haven't given the in-person talk for a long time, it shows. So yes, I did not talk anything about the demand reduction. And what I do know from press release data and talking to law enforcement is that they're processing a lot faster than used to for traffickers. So that's an improvement. I don't know if that's because the current administration is more eager to do that. I didn't see that in the last couple of years. And the sentencing is more punitive. So those are improvement. Can they do much better? Yes. Now, should advocacy group get into that field? I am ambivalent about that because it is I worked with the cops, multiple people, a little bit here and there, not seriously. And it is a dangerous business. And so us directly going into the chasing the traffickers or finding the information about them, I don't think that's our job, advocacy job. Lobbying to DOJ to do that. Now, DOJ's budget for human trafficking is relatively minuscule compared to other funding. Most of them going to law enforcement and violence, and some law enforcement folks still think, well, trafficking, that's not as bad as murder, right? And that's the kind of perception they have. But I would say that you can lobby to increase training in law enforcement, especially in rural areas. And that you can do, and you'll be very effective because you have a wide network of survivors in people with the knowledge of human trafficking. So I don't usually cover the demand reduction myself, but I think it's a neglected area. I think we can do that better, much better. But if you're talking about sex trafficking, it's sex is normal behavior. So there has to be something more. Just reducing the demand, buying the sex. That ain't gonna cut it because it's been. I mean, that's, to be honest, it's prostitution. I don't use that word often, but I use it here. It has a history as long as human being history evolved. So it's a huge issue, and I'm not quite sure it should be addressed solely in the realm of human trafficking, to be honest with you. I don't know if that answers your question. Follow-up question, or anybody else? All right. I think our time is up. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you sleep well tonight, because then you have a full day tomorrow, and enjoy your conference. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Dr. Price. I think I sound like a smurf over this, but we'll go with it. So thank you all. I hope you enjoyed the very first evening of our conference. We will begin again tomorrow morning with, I have to look, breakfast. Breakfast from 7:30 to 8:30 out here in the foyer, out there in the foyer. And then we will start with a welcome and an opening speaker from Fill It Forward, which is a nonprofit that provides funding to a variety of other nonprofits every time you scan one of their tags. If you look at the back of your name tag, you will see there is a little QR code sticker that has been kind of inserted there. You can take that sticker and put it on a refillable water bottle, and every time you scan that water bottle, you will be donating money to a nonprofit. So we will have someone here to give us a brief overview of that in the morning, and then we will get started with breakout sessions at 9 a.m. And then without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sister Kathleen Cole, who will give our closing prayer for the night.
I'm sure I speak for everyone in saying that this evening has been so fruitful. And we certainly have been blessed with good food, good conversation, the meetings of old friends and new friends, and certainly the excellent presentation we just had. Yes, we have so much to be grateful for. And so let us turn to our God and pray. Loving God, may we use what we have heard this evening to grow in greater respect and dignity that is due to each person. Awaken our hearts and deepen our commitment to work that all are free and able to live healed and independent lives of hope and joy. We ask this in the name of Jesus, our brother. Amen.